Hey guys, coming back to you with the another leadership podcast today, and we've been looking at the leadership pipeline over the course of the last few podcasts, and today I want to take a break from looking at competencies, and I want to look at character. In fact, we're going to do this whole podcast on character trumping competencies. And so to just kind of recap you on the leadership pipeline, we talk about leadership being two sides to one coin, one side being character and one side being competencies, and that churches often will focus on character, and there's a good reason for that, and do a lot of character development. That's just sort of the nature of a church, and really miss the boat on actually developing competencies and leadership skills. We know that about 80% or so of leadership skills are transferable between departments and ministries, between nonprofits, churches, secular businesses, for-profit. And we want largely to look at competencies and skill development in our podcasts. But before we do, and I think in our last podcast we kind of went through all those competencies at a very high level. Before we do, we have to talk about this, and that is that foundationally, the character, there's sort of some minimum character requirements that have to be in place. I mean, they're an absolute must before you can put somebody into leadership.
Right.
And I can't reiterate that enough. So I'm Daniel Morgan, associate pastor here at Res Church, and this is Jay Garcia, a downtown campus pastor and a good friend of mine. And we're going to try to tackle this today. And so what I want to give you is this. This is a sort of a premise of what this looks like. If you are training someone in leadership skills who lacks the minimum requirements, sort of the necessary character for leadership, you are not developing a leader. You are actually training a con artist.
Right.
Like, that's kind of a strong statement.
That's absolutely true, and it could be to the detriment of everything that you're trying to accomplish.
So you might be making a bigger mess than you had without having a leader for your team by putting a leader in that doesn't have the minimum character.
You could be tearing down what you're trying to build up.
Right. Okay. So that's a strong statement, right? If you're developing the leadership skills in an individual that doesn't have some minimum level of character, you are not developing a leader. You are training a con artist. You're training a manipulator. You're training an influencer, but that's not going to influence well. And so I would even go so far as to say this, that you are arming people with skills to go influence others, to change decisions, to change the direction of what they're doing, to convince them to do something. But because of the lack of character, what you're going to get is very dangerous, almost like putting a weapon in an untrained person's hands.
Absolutely. That would be a good analogy to use.
So let me give you an experience of this. I had a guy I met in high school that was a son of a pastor. And so growing up in church and with his dad as a pastor and around a lot of other pastors, he had learned, probably not intentionally, but just sort of learned naturally all these leadership skills. How to communicate really well, how to care for people. I mean, he's just really good at some of the leadership skills. I would say they just came naturally to him. An extrovert and horrible character. I mean, he's a teen already, but just terrible character. And if we were looking at minimum characteristics and character, we would say an F. I mean, he failed outright. But because he had those skills, that guy wreaked some havoc in my life and in others' lives, meaning he would take us off onto just, I'll say, adventures. Right? That's the PG version. And the guy was constant. And then we catch the guy, and he's making out with a girl over here, and he's doing this over here, and just always in trouble, too, with others, because he could lead them. He just picked very poor paths to lead them down, and sort of single-handedly busted up a ministry for a while there, a youth ministry. A lot of individuals in that youth ministry ended up leaving the church for different reasons or became very disillusioned with the faith. And so it was like, here's a guy who actually naturally has very high competencies, low character, havoc, chaos, and everything else.
And that kind of havoc and chaos is not easily overcome. It leaves a wake that is continually basically spreading.
Well, everyone's feeling the impact of that, right? So even in my experience in for-profit jobs, there's still a minimum level, a minimum requirement of character, and you can have all the skills in the world, but boy, you really miss on a character area, and that team, that organization, that company suffers tremendously.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things then. If that's the case, I want to walk through that, and I want to walk through maybe some action items for people. So the first is, here at the church, we have, and this is ongoing, but we have continued to mold and develop a mechanism for what I would say is we call vetting leaders. So that is trying to figure out, this is our whole vetting process, by the way, trying to figure out, does the person that we're considering to put in any type of leadership position have the appropriate amount of character in some different areas before we put them before we even talk to them about leadership? And one of the reasons for that is this. You can develop in someone, and you can poke holes in this if you want. You can develop in someone who doesn't have a very good skill in a competency, or you can develop that skill while they're a leader. So they can start leading and be poor at something, and you can work on that. Well, we call that on-the-job training, right?
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And potentially not have a horribly negative impact if the character's right.
Right.
I cannot put somebody into leadership with a really poor character, with a huge miss in a character area, and try to develop or change that while they're in leadership position.
Character is innately who you are. So
absolutely.
The analogy or the saying is, your character is who you are when nobody else is in the room. And so if you are just not a very high character individual, that's not generally something apart from the power of the Holy Spirit that can be regenerated or corrected.
Right. So I can teach a skill, but character requires some transformation, some personal development.
Absolutely.
I read a quote the other day that said, basically, the only thing that is going to walk away from the grave after you're buried is your character.
Yep.
So what everybody who goes to your grave site and talks hopefully good about you, depending on how well they lie. No matter what they say, what's leaving the graveyard is your character.
Right.
And if it was poor, then that's what people are taking with them. Okay, so point being, I guess then, when we talk about vetting leadership, we're primarily at Resurrection Church, when we're looking at leaders, someone for leadership, we are primarily looking at, do they meet a minimum threshold for character in a bunch of different areas? So we're looking for red flags. We're looking for minimum requirement. We actually don't look, I don't know if you know this or not, we don't look at a single leadership competency when we're vetting for someone to just get into a leadership position.
Because it's all about character.
It is. So, and that's not necessarily at a director or pastoral level.
Right.
But if I'm just saying a team lead for a volunteer team, I can teach the skills. Hopefully they come in with some, but I can teach the skills.
And generally, if you are considering them for leadership, they've exhibited some of that already.
Right. You've maybe seen something already, or someone's recommended them for something. But we're going back. We have this whole vetting process. It's all about character. Okay. So the way we do that, there are a couple different things that we do, but one of the main things that we do is we want to talk to people who have served alongside them. So you can hide things from your boss. You really rarely hide things from your peers. The people that are working alongside you over a period of time are going to notice those things, and they're the ones that are observing it. And so maybe my best analogy is what we've started doing now for job interviews is, if you get to a certain level in a job interview here, we actually sit down and do prepare and enrich assessment, which is a marriage. We use oftentimes for marriage counseling, premarital counseling. We do that assessment. You and your wife do that. Or if you're coming in for a director position, maybe you and your husband do that. And then we sit down with both of you, and we start poking in at the marriage, because who knows you best
than your spouse?
Nobody knows you better than your spouse. They know all the stuff, right? And so it's in that process where we're looking for character, and we're looking at the people that know you the best, right? They're really pushing in on you. So what's, I think, interesting about that is, not only is that great in the vetting process, right? So talking about, is someone prepared for leadership? Are they going to get me in a mess if I put them in leadership? Should I hire this candidate who I think has the skills, but now I need to know, do they have the character? But additionally, now I take that and I overlay that on the people that are on my team. So if I if I manage people who lead teams? Well, if it's important at the job interview stage, if it's important at the vetting stage, then it's clearly going to be important ongoing.
Absolutely. It's accountability, right?
It's accountability. I mean, I need to know if suddenly there's a big character gap in your life.
Yeah.
Because it's going to matter.
Absolutely. Right? So you definitely got to push into those who are in a constant community, be it an accountability group, the people that serve on a team, a community group. I mean, any number of those areas will be able to always tell you.
Well, I want you to even think about this. I mean, take it to the for-profit or secular business world level. I run a team, or I have employees, and I have these team leaders, and I have to find a way in the business environment. I have to find a way to push in enough in their lives to be able then to see if there's a character flaw developing, if there's a character concern, if there's a red flag. Like somehow, some way, whether that's taking them out to lunch, whether that's spending some time with them on a weekend. I mean, like whatever that looks like. I have to know that, because if that thing develops without me seeing it, and I've allowed that to continue, and sort of an environment fosters that character flaw over time, like kind of your wake analogy, there's going to be a wake behind that impacts all these divisions inside my company.
Right.
So how well do you know your leaders? I think it's a great question. The next is like surface level knowledge is certainly not enough.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even observing their competencies. It's how well do you know their character?
Yeah. Both
from when you brought them into the fold, so during that vetting or pre-qual process, and also just ongoing. So what do you know about their lives? And what I like to call, there's this level of discernment that I think if you're really, for me, that level of discernment is both a skill that I've learned over time, and it's also a Holy Spirit God-given gift that there are times where the Holy Spirit shows me something that I would not have seen.
Right.
And I'm very thankful that I would have been really ignorant if it weren't for God having some mercy on me and showing me some stuff. Or what I like to call even sometimes the sniff test. Like if you get a whiff of something that seems like it could be a character red flag.
Absolutely. It's a great time to push in and try to figure out what's going on.
And so the way we model this here is we've talked a lot about our one-on-one sessions and our accountability, and you've got some different accountability in your life, and then you provide that for others. So maybe walk us through kind of what accountability looks like.
Sure. I mean, I just actually got back from a lunch right now with my accountability group because we couldn't meet on a regular scheduled time. And, that just kind of involves sitting down and oftentimes maybe just having a conversation. And through those natural interactions, you kind of pick up on small things maybe that they said, or a comment that they kind of made under their breath. And then, like you said, sniff test. Okay, that was weird. Let's explore that a little bit.
Now, there's a key to that, right? Because you smell it, and then there's a decision to be made, sometimes maybe an awkward decision to be made when you sense that. And what is that like? I mean, because that's the tough part, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you are accountable with these people, I like the quote that you posted the other day where you have to give your accountability people a hunting license to go looking and searching out these areas in your life where maybe there is a slight flaw or defect that needs to be addressed in order that it doesn't begin to compound in other areas of your life.
Yeah. I was sitting down with one of my accountability partners the other day, and they're really pressing in on me on my pursuit of the Lord, and what does that look like, and when is that happening, and how has that fulfilled you? I mean, real tough, specific questions where you can't dodge it with a vagary or everything's great. Those aren't allowed.
No, there has to be vulnerability.
Right.
If you're not willing to be vulnerable, you're wasting everybody's time.
Right. Now, even though you might have a lead role over people that you're managing and leading, team leads, you still have to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because people will be more apt to become vulnerable if they see that you are sharing in that vulnerability, right? So you're not going to ask somebody to do something that you are not willing to or have not done yourself.
So even in like a for-profit business, and I'm the boss and these are the employees or managers or what have you, I still don't have the luxury of coming in and be like, you be vulnerable, you be authentic, you tell me what's going on, and I'm going to have a kind of a wall around me.
Yeah, you lead by example.
You have to lead by example. It works that way no matter what the organization is. Okay. Let's talk about just a couple worst case scenarios. Okay. So, we've highlighted in our leadership pipeline some character qualities that you have to have, certain levels of, depending on the level of leadership, because of course the standard goes up the more you lead.
Yeah.
Like the larger groups you lead, the standard is even tougher. And so the way we've written it out, you can download the little Excel spreadsheet that is our pipeline, or the PDF, and look at it. But we've got integrity, we've got the sort of selflessness versus selfishness, and pride area.
Right.
We have self-control, really big one. We have joy and passion, and we have committedness. And before we get into those, because I want to talk about worst case scenarios, I wanted to read this to you. It's funny that we're talking about these and we have them written out. And then I just went and I opened up Titus. And if you're not familiar with Titus, here's a letter kind of explaining to Titus, who goes to the island of Crete. Basically he's being told, hey, you're going to need to find some leaders. And so there's a description of what leaders should be able to do and have. And we go to this for church leadership all the time.
Right.
And here's why, because it's the qualifications for elders. And so what you see here is a qualification for elder in Titus chapter 1, verse 6 is this. This is a qualification for elders. It says, if anyone is above reproach, so there's already a pattern of good character ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
So there's the vetting process,
Yeah.
like they vetted him. If anyone's above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers, and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must, now here's the list of characteristics, ready? He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. That's right off the bat, arrogant, right? We have pride and selfishness. Or a drunkard or violent, so there's self-control and self-discipline. Or greedy for gain, so there's selfishness versus selflessness.
Yeah.
But hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, we're back to self-disciplined, upright, holy, and disciplined. So basically, Titus is laying out, or the book of Titus is laying out character qualifications for elders and overseers in the church, and it's really right in line with what we've listed here.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk about what happens when you have a leader, regardless of how good the competencies are, that has a major character gap in even just one of these areas. And maybe we have some stories we've been talking about.
Right.
So let me give you just maybe a more secular one about integrity. I would tell you that integrity is the single most important of all the characteristics. Now, I don't think if you don't meet a minimum level in the character side that you can lead anyways.
Right.
And so in that case, you even prioritizing them isn't that. But integrity is the number one. The moment I can't trust the leader,
Yeah, there's
your
a problem.
team is toast, right? And some of the best examples we've seen have been politically. If you go back and really do a case study across the whole Vietnam War, how that conflict started and what happened, you can watch a wonderful case study. John Maxwell writes about this, a wonderful case study in what happens when you begin to lie to the public. And they begin to lie, basically the press releases, the press secretary begin to change facts, and they begin to change the narrative around Vietnam, and each time they cut one of those corners, they were just chopping their legs off underneath them. And so it got to the point where just the amount of trust around leadership was at an all-time low. I mean, we set records for how bad that was.
Right.
There's a whole chapter in this in John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and it's called the Law of Solid Ground. And it really details out that if you don't have trust, you don't have anything.
That's true.
And as a new leader coming into an organization, a lot of times you spend a good chunk of time just building trust.
Yeah.
So that you can go do other things that need to get done, which is sometimes scary when you're trying to get stuff done. But I would tell you it's the single most important character trait, because I think it's also the single most important character trait in friends.
Yeah.
If you think about your closest friends, you trust them inherently.
Yeah.
You don't have really close friends that you don't trust. They're almost synonyms.
Yeah.
I don't have any close friends that I don't trust.
Right. Why would you let somebody?
Why would you let someone in if
Yeah.
you don't trust them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the quickest way to them being out the door.
Yeah, it's absolutely foundational for every serious relationship in your life.
Absolutely, and I don't think I could overemphasize how detrimental everything would be if you put someone in leadership who's not trustworthy, who doesn't have integrity. Where I can give you symptoms of things that'll happen in other character gaps. In this one, it just blows up.
Yeah.
It just everything just melts down when you don't have trust. So, single most important thing, trustworthiness or integrity, making the right decisions.
Absolutely.
You know, I've talked about this before, I think, which is, you know, integrity is really what you do when no one's looking, or when you think no one's looking, and it's hard to ascertain what that is in other people, right? Those private decisions. Maybe one of the best scenarios I had is years ago. I had a customer out of LA actually that we'd done a lot of business with, and they had maybe a $200,000-$300,000 deal coming up, and so the IT director drove from LA here and said he was going to be in town, which I thought was odd anyways. And he comes in my office, schedules an appointment. He says, "Hey, you know, got this deal coming up, $250,000 or whatever," and I'm like, "Sure." And he's like, "So what I want to know is like, what's in it for me?" And like, it took me a while. I was like, "What are you talking?" And what he wanted a kickback from this deal. And so when I finally kind of figured out what he was asking for, and there's no one around, this is my office, I asked him. I said, "Hey, let me ask you a question, so that I understand. I want to make sure we're on the same page."
Right.
Because I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe I just misunderstood that he's basically asking to be bribed. And I said, "Can I take this money, whatever this is going to be, and can I mail it to your boss to give to you?" And he's like, "Well, no, I get fired." I go, "Well, then I can't do it." Like, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, but if what we're talking about is not a discount, it's not a competitive thing, right? It's not even a let's go to lunch. Like, it's a legit bribe.
Yeah.
And I know that because the litmus test is I can't tell other people about it. Oh, well, then I can't do it. If I can't do it out in public, I can't do it here.
Absolutely.
I didn't get that deal. Like, I lost that client. I didn't lose any sleep over it.
Probably for the best, though.
I didn't lose any sleep over it at all, right? Like, anyways, okay, so integrity. How about, I'm going to jump down here to joy and passion.
Okay.
Tell me about a leader who doesn't have passion or joy in what they do.
A leader that does not have any joy or passion behind what they do will wholeheartedly suck the joy and passion from everybody else.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, walking into the room and just, if there's no joy and passion, there's no legitimate reason for anybody to want to jump on board with what you're doing, because it's not going to be joyful, and it's probably without passion going to be devoid of direction, or proper direction.
But what you're saying is almost a multiplication, so that it's not just that the leader who doesn't have joy or passion is tough to work for, but that it's almost a vacuum.
Yeah,
it almost pulls. So you could have joyful, passionate people who are actually robbed of their joy or robbed of the passion for the mission or the task, because if the leader doesn't have it, they pull it out of everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been in situations personally where I have worked for people who have made it impossible to be joyful about what I'm doing, and coming from the business the business side of things. And so I can tell you that you can take people that are completely healthy and generally in a good place in their work, and if a leader comes in that is devoid of joy or passion, that team can become unhealthy quickly.
Okay. That's a little different than some of the other character traits in terms of what we see, because that almost has a multiplication effect.
Absolutely.
Right? That actually takes people who are healthy and just pulls the motivation right out of them. Right. Let's talk about selfishness or the lack of selflessness, and I kind of combine that with pride, because they can be very similarly related. Not always, but at the root of pride is really a selfishness of ego, and I think you'll see a couple symptoms if you see this in an individual. So if the leader has a selfishness or a sense of pride, they're not very teachable.
Right.
And so what happens over time when they can't admit wrong, they become a team that's very bad at evaluating, because they can never admit doing anything wrong.
Right.
So what occurs inside that team is the entire team becomes very defensive. And then you can get a lot of what feels like politics, because no one wants to admit wrong, so it has to be someone's fault. So either inside the team they're all blaming each other and throwing each other under the bus, or they're always pointing at another team somewhere and it's their fault, right?
Yeah.
But you don't get good evaluation anymore, so you can't correct, you can't steer the ship. So if they had an initiative that clearly was starting to fail, but no one can admit it because everybody's so prideful, they just double down on the bad decision and it just gets worse and worse. And you need, so not just like you need someone that has passion in the mission, you need them to believe in the mission over their own personal self-interest.
Right.
And you need the team to do that too. And if, whenever you're putting your own personal interest, your own ego, your own pride, and how you look above the mission, that's going to cascade down. We had a chance to bring someone in like that once, not really this was before we vetted much, had really high competencies.
Right.
I mean, just the kind of high skill level that tricks you.
Yeah.
Into thinking like they must be a phenomenal leader because the skill set is so good.
Yeah.
And man, I to this day have probably never seen a team go bad as fast as that team went bad. And we finally got in some meetings and realized that the level of pride was so high that like nothing was ever their fault. And I mean, they just, I think we lost families from the church.
Yeah.
We lost all kinds of things because of the wake of that.
Without even mentioning it, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that that selfishness can also be to the detriment of the team because, again, if you want that accountability, you need to show people that you love them, that you care for them,
Right.
that you are after their best interest. And if you aren't exhibiting that in your actions or in your character, if you're selfish, you're not going to get that buy-in.
Right. Self-control is another big one. So, I think if you have a leader that doesn't have self-control, whether that's controlling their emotions, controlling their habits, what you're going to find in a lack of self-control is your team is very volatile.
Yeah.
So your team will be really great for a week or for a month, and then they'll be really bad. And you're wondering why that team is up and down so much, and it's actually the lack of self-control from the leader.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about self-control is we see this in a bunch of different areas because there are things that I think we're all innately good at controlling ourselves with, and then we all have our weakness. And the point is to be a really high-level leader, and to have really great character. You need to have self-control in all the areas of life, even the ones that are tough. So it's one thing for me to say, well, I have great self-control in drinking alcohol because it's not a problem.
Right.
So because it's not a problem for me, and there's not enough of an attraction to ever. So yeah, I'm great at it. But then ask me about overworking. Oh, now I got a better problem. Ask me about not speaking too quickly when I want to. Oh boy, now all of a sudden things just got real.
Yeah.
And so for some people it's temper and anger, and so for some people I see this a lot in the church. Man, they'll really harp on a couple things around self-control, but when it comes to eating, when it comes to sleeping enough, right? Because we, especially leaders, tend to overwork.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to a guy. He's sleeping 4.5 hours a night, and he's really all about discipline over here. But I'm like, yeah, but hey, man, you're killing yourself.
Yeah.
There's no self-control.
It's spokes on the wheel of a bike. One of them is out of whack, and the whole thing just falls apart and doesn't function well.
So I think the big one for me in self-control is, you have to have your emotions under control. I've never met a really good leader who couldn't control their temper.
Right.
Ever.
That's been a ongoing theme in this current season for me. It's something that God put on my heart and that I have been speaking with all of the leaders under me and even my accountability guys and some of the guys that I just meet with frequently. And it's like, we need to do a better job of praying for our emotional health. We pray for physical health and,
right.
All of these things, but emotional health is incredibly important because emotions are like the rudder of a boat, right? It can steer the whole thing off course quickly if you're not in control of those emotions.
Absolutely. And for us to be quick to praise and slow to correct means that the correction side of that has to be very controlled, very disciplined. It can't be us popping off and stuff. And so I think
well, not all the time.
Well, behind closed doors. So self-control becomes a big deal.
Right.
And then the last one that I had here, we covered integrity, covered selfishness and pride, covered joy, passion, covered self-control, and the last one I have is committedness or steadfastness.
Right.
And look, I think without this, you're never going to actually build a robust team. So if you have a lackadaisical commitment, if you have some volatility to commitment as a leader, your team never actually really grows, because what happens is right about the time that you're recruiting the last few members of the team, the first ones have already dropped off because you're so inconsistent with them. And so there's a consistency, steadfastness that the leader has to exemplify almost better than the team members, so they have something to look to know, hey, there's an anchor here,
Yeah.
there's a rock, there's a foundation to this team. And I would tell you that I don't, again, if you see a team where there's a lot of turnover,
Yeah.
normally I'm looking at the committedness of the leader,
Right.
and whether or not they're going to be consistent enough, steadfast enough for leadership. So, okay, those are 5 that we gave you, and in those 5, if you miss on any of them, you miss on one of them, there's a potential for pretty devastating
Absolutely.
problems. If you kind of look at the character traits on the pipeline, you'll notice that as the position level goes up, the requirements of those go up as well. And it gets, you get to a pastoral level, you get to someone, we talk about leading tens, leading hundreds, leading thousands. You're going to be a leader of thousands of people. The amount of self-control, the consistency needed in your life, the passion to what is going to be tough work,
Right.
hard work, the integrity, where even sometimes the perception of an integrity problem is devastating.
Yeah.
All of the standards go up, and just as a close before we have some takeaways, one of the things that I've started to notice, there's a quote I've heard a few times, I think Russ has said it, and I think it's a Maxwell quote, but it says, to achieve uncommon things, you have to live in an uncommon way. And, I've noticed for myself, because my schedule is pretty tight, I have a lot of responsibilities, I have a lot of people pulling at me, that I don't have my schedule, my commitments don't have the tolerance for even small slip-ups. I mean, even little slip-ups are a big deal, and I see the wake of them all through my family and everything else. And so much of my life has become incredibly regimented.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way it'll work.
Yeah.
It seems weird, but it's a big deal. All right, so here's what we'll do. We're going to have some what I think are really pertinent takeaways from this character conversation in our handout. And what we're going to ask you to do is do a little self-analysis of your own character. And we're going to have you do a little bit of analysis of people that you're either are your leaders today or that you're considering for leadership. And here's what I would say to you. If you have an individual that you see has some of the competencies, some of the skills, maybe an up-and-comer where you're like, man, I could develop that person for leadership, but the character's not there in an area, right? Don't give up on that person. Do not give up on that person. And at the same time, do not put them in leadership.
Yeah.
It's you can't do either. You're going to need to work with that individual, or you're going to need people you trust to work with that individual to help them develop their character. We sometimes call that mentorship. We sometimes call that accountability. I mean, you have a lot of names for it.
Yeah.
It can be a very organic thing, or it can be very structured. But you're going to need a plan to begin working with that individual and observing their character over time, so that when they finally do get to the point where the character is where it needs to be, where that transformation and development has happened, you can then begin to work on the skills.
Right.
Don't get it out of order. Don't start working on skills when the character still has a gap.
Yeah.
Because you're arming them with some dangerous skills.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster. And you're spinning your wheels a little bit.
Yeah.
Until the character's changed, the motivation behind the use of those skills will not have changed. So it's out of order. So character first, foundational item. If character is not there, we're not putting them in leadership. We're not giving up on them, but we're going to have to be strategic about what it looks like to put them in an environment for development.
Yeah.
I am not exaggerating when I say that I have individuals in organization. I have individuals in this church that I have stashed, okay, in community groups, in volunteer roles, in men's groups. I have, I mean, like, I'll go to someone and go, here's the deal, right? This cat could be great for the kingdom. Character flaw, character flaw, character flaw. Here's what I need you to do, Jake.
Right.
Right? I need you to sit down, and it's a crock pot. And we talk about this all the time. It's not a microwave.
Yeah.
It's a crock pot. Slow, steady heat. Let God come in there and do work. Get into the press and watch that character transformation happen.
Yeah.
And we're just going to leave them in there, leave them in there, leave them in there, press on them, and let God do some work on them. And then, when God's done the work, when we think now we got some character here, now we can get into some competencies.
It's being intentional.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, man, appreciate it.
No
Thanks
problem.
for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, and hope you download these questions and that they're fruitful for you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.